Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to order for November the 28th, 2023. And I acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on unceded, unsurrendered homelands of the Algonquin people. I would like to thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their land and express our appreciation of the wisdom that they continue to share with us, and acknowledge our joint responsibility for taking good care of this land and everyone and everything that's in it. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare. If so, please do so now. And seeing none, I would remind members to share declarations in writing if they have declarations with board services immediately following the meeting. And now we move on to the report from our in-camera session tonight. Just there's something strange about just a moment. Yes, the next item is indeed the report from Committee of the Whole in camera this evening, and I would like to call on Trustee Lyra.
The board met in camera this evening, and there are no action items coming out of the Committee of the Whole in camera.
Thank you very much. Now I am looking for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Blackburn, seconded by Trustee Aziz. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If none, then I will call the question on the agenda as presented. All those in favor and opposed, and that motion is carried. And I will now provide my briefing for this evening. Yesterday, Trustee Jenkins and I were at Queen's Park in Toronto to participate in the Ontario Public School Boards Association Advocacy Day. Nearly 50 English Public School Board trustees from across Ontario, together with several student leaders from the Ontario Student Trustees Association, met with members of the Legislative Assembly from all political parties. It was an excellent opportunity to discuss education issues and build relationships with provincial officials. We would like to thank the Ontario Public School Boards Association for organizing this event and express our appreciation to Ottawa area MPPs Blais, Collard, Fraser, Hardin, McCrimmon, and Pasma for making time to meet with us. Last week, the Parent Involvement Committee appointed several parent members, Calla Barnett, Tabassum Khan, and Alison Telford, as well as a new community member, the Center for Resilience and Social Development, to join those whose terms continue through the next year. We welcome all of them to the committee. We also want to thank former members Suzanne Lyon and Nancy Dean for their dedication and support for parental engagement in the OCDSB during their years of service on the Parent Involvement Committee. And finally, I would like to close with a reminder that the OCDSB is seeking an Indigenous community member to serve on the Special Education Advisory Committee and advocate for the interests of Indigenous students who have special education needs. More information can be found on our website. The deadline for applications is December the 15th. Are there any questions on the briefing? Seeing none, we can move then to the briefing from the director. Mr. Director.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening to everyone. On Saturday, I had the honor to participate in a symposium at the National Gallery of Canada to celebrate the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024, hosted by the Ubuntu Collective. I would like to thank Executive Officer Michelle Giroux for her leadership in coordinating this extraordinary event with the support of our communications team. It was an insightful day of reflection on this decade and how we are taking actions forward as a community and as a learning organization. In remarks during one panel session, while I acknowledge that oppression and discrimination still exist within our systems, structures, policies, and practices, it was also gratifying to be able to elaborate on the many steps that have been taken towards promoting greater knowledge of and respect for the diverse heritage, culture, and contribution of people of African descent as a district since we signed the declaration in the spring of 2018, including but not limited to the establishment of a dedicated superintendent of equity position within the district, the hiring of a human rights and equity advisor, and the creation of an office for the human rights and equity matters, the development of the Indigenous Equity Human Rights Roadmap for 2020 to 2023, which reflects a human rights-based approach focusing on equity and non-discrimination, participation and inclusion, as well as transparency, accessibility, and accountability, and the continuation and evolution of that roadmap, of course, moving forward this school year, as well as our first identity-based data collection report in 2020, and of course, 2 strategic plans of 2019 to 2023, and our current plan for 2023 to 2027, with equity as a driver of the decision-making processes in our strategic pillars. And last but not least, the creation of an anti-hate toolkit for educators for utilization, excuse me, in the classroom with our students and of course our staff. A reminder to our school councils that applications are now open for the Parents Reaching Out Grant. This is funded by the Ministry of Education. School councils may apply for $750 to support innovative projects and activities to engage parents and guardians as well as caregivers. Councils are able to submit their applications until the 12th of January, 2024. Finally, on Thursday nights here at the board office, our main lobby echoes with the sound of music. The Ottawa-Carleton choirs practice here each and every week. There's a choir of active and retired teachers and staff from the OCDSB that share this wonderful sound. They will be holding a Christmas performance at Woodruff United Church on Saturday, December 9th at 7:30 p.m. The cost is a cash donation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions for the director on his briefing? Seeing none, that brings us to delegations. And this evening we have a written delegation. I remind trustees that the change of bylaws that was made in the last year would have us receive delegations primarily on items that are on our agenda. However, there is the opportunity also to receive delegations on items that are of general interest to the board. And in this case, I believe that it was important for trustees to have an opportunity to read this delegation this evening. And I have asked the director if he could please comment in terms of the response that we are undertaking to make when there are incidents of anti-Semitism affecting Jewish students in our schools.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate both the written delegation and the concern raised by a parent, guardian, or caregiver in our school communities. We do know that globally as well as locally, students, staff, and school communities are struggling with how to handle, how to manage, how to work their way through various elements of conflict around the planet, including the conflict in the Middle East, most specifically in this particular delegation. Did want to share with the Board of Trustees, of course, a number of memoranda that have been shared with staff on the 7th of November. We shared a guidance document for K-12 educators around how to deal with some of the concerns that are raised, some of the worries, some of the conflict that may arise from different perspectives with our educators. We followed that up with a subsequent memorandum to staff as well for various forms of assistance and making use of our centrally assigned staff to help our educators support conversations in the classroom. We're working with our community groups, with our parent involvement committee, for instance, around some of the concerns that are raised, and do want to acknowledge that we understand for students who are Jewish, students who are Muslim, that there are concerns and fears regarding some of the global events taking place, and that we'll look to support our students in every capacity on site in schools, whether it's to their classroom teachers, guidance counselors, administrators, or other support staff. And we look to assure our parents and guardians that as concerns are raised at home, please do bring them forward to us in our school sites and centrally to continue to evolve the types of supports we're providing to our students, in this case, a Jewish student and a Jewish parent guardian who are very concerned about some of the global events and their impact within our local setting. So very much appreciate the delegation that's been brought to us here in writing, and that we'll continue to work to ensure our students are safe and that we hear their voices, hear their concerns, and share perspectives. For staff, it is a delicate balance, honoring the freedom of expression or identity on the part of students, while also encouraging them not to do so in a manner that's hurtful or harmful to others. We'll continue to strive to work towards that balance in a sensible and respectful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions for the Director? And I am seeing none, so we will move on then to confirmation of the board minutes from the 30th of October, 2023, and also the 14th of November, 2023. Could we have a mover, please, for both those sets of minutes? Trustee Nash, thank you. And seconded by? Did I see Trustee Milburn's hand? I think I saw her hand up there. Seconded by Trustee Milburn. Are there any errors or omissions in these minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question to confirm both sets of board minutes from the 30th of October and the 14th of November, 2023. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Is there any business arising from either of these sets of minutes? Seeing none, moving on then to matters for action, beginning with item 11.1, and that is receipt of the Ad Hoc Policy Review Committee. The Ad Hoc Advocacy Strategy Committee. And I look to the chair of the committee to present the report.
Thank you,
Would
Chair.
you move receipt first?
Yes, I'll move the receipt. My apologies, the notes are pulling up slowly, but whoa, the document has been modified. Sorry. So our conversations with the the Advocacy Strategy Committee continue. This meeting was to discuss how to align our efforts closely with OPSPA's advocacy efforts, preparing briefs and confirming our top priority areas. And the committee is hoping to work, continue this work and bring ongoing work such as this to the board in future meetings.
So do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Lyra, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in the report? And seeing none, I'll call the question then on receipt of the report. All those in favor? And opposed? The motion is carried. And next, we have receipt of the Committee of the Whole report from the 21st of November, 2023. Trustee Milburn,
I would like to move receipt of the report from the Committee of the Whole dated November 21st, 2023, please.
and is there a seconder for that? Trustee Presley, thank you. And you have recommendations in the report?
I do, Madam Chair, on a motion by Trustee Lee, which I will second, that report 23-076 be approved as the Audit Committee Annual Report to the Board for 2022 to 2023 as amended.
And is this a consent item? I'm seeing no objection. Do you have any additional recommendations?
I do, Madam Chair, on a motion by Trustee Lee, which I will second, that Appendix A to Report 23-074 be approved as the 2022 to 2023 Annual Report on Internal Audit Activity.
Thank you. And is this a consent item? And I'm seeing no objection to it being in a consent item. So we will deal with those in a moment in a vote. We also have on our agenda item 11.3, which is receipt of the Audit Committee report from the 27th of November, 2023. And this is an oral report. Trustee Lyra.
I'd love to move receipt.
So we have a motion to receive the oral Audit Committee report, seconded by Trustee Aziz. Thank you. All those in favor of receipt of the oral report and opposed, the motion is carried. And I believe you have a recommendation.
I do. That the 2022-2023 consolidated financial statements attached as Appendix A to Report 23-087 be approved.
And I could ask, this was moved by Mr. Brian Burns, who is one of our external audit committee members, and seconded by Trustee Lyra. You see that on the screen. And I'm not going to ask if this is consent because from my perspective, it is non-consent. So I would like to move that on, and that means we have two motions that are consent ones.
I moved it.
Oh, we didn't have a mover in substitution.
I can move it.
You're already the seconder. So Trustee Lee, or no, who else is on the audit committee? Trustee Lee? Trustee Lee could move it in substitution. And so that will move to non-consent, and that means we have to vote on the two recommendations from the 21st of November, 2023. This will be a recorded vote, and I hope everybody has their e-scribe handy. So these are the two recommendations: the approval of the Audit Committee Annual Report and the Annual Report on Internal Audit Activity for 2022-2023. All those in favor signify your vote in e-scribe, please. Trustee Presley, do you, are you having problem with the scribe? You're voting in
Yes, I
favor
am,
by
Madam
raising your
Chair.
hand.
Thank you. Yes, I'm voting in favor for both, please.
And we have a result. The motion is carried with 10 in favor, none opposed. For those two motions. So that brings us then to the non-consent items. And which is the approval of the draft audited financial statements. And I believe that our staff do have a presentation for us this evening. Mr. Director, am I correct on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Associate Director Gerwa and staff for an update on the consolidated financial statements.
Through you, Chair. Before we start with the presentation, first, I'd just like to thank the finance team who have been working extremely hard over the last couple of months, closing off the old year and starting the new year. We had two significant issues arise this year with that impacted both the compliance and the drafted financial statements, which were the settlements related to Bill 124 and changes to some ARO reporting, which created a lot of last minute work for not only the finance team, but also our auditors. Next, I'd like to thank Rebecca and the KPMG team for their hard work in preparing these financial statements and their professionalism in supporting us. And lastly, I kind of like to point out the difficulties we had in maintaining our financial position from a compliance perspective last year, given the rising costs in areas that are beyond our control, like replacement costs, utilities, snow removal. It was a very tight budget, and I'd like to continue to reiterate that the tools that we have to manage that budget are subpar. And I just wanted to make those comments before I turn it over to the General Manager of Finance to present the financial statements.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, once the PowerPoint is up. Thank you. So tonight I'm going to review two types of statements. One is the consolidated financial statements, which was reviewed and audited by KPMG. And the second will be the compliance report. Both reports use the same information. It's just that the ministry pulls certain information out in order to determine if we have met their compliance or we have met the rules within which we can remit to the ministry. We want to start with the first slide. So we'll start with the consolidated financial statements. The OCDSB's consolidated financial statements include our OCDSB financial activities, OSTA, or the Ottawa Student Transportation Authority, OCNET, or Ottawa-Carleton Education Network, and finally, our school-generated funds, which includes school council funds, fundraising as well. They present information about our financial assets and liabilities in addition to revenues and expenses. Next slide, please. So if we look at our consolidated financial statements, you'll notice in the budget, we had initially projected a $10.7 million surplus. That surplus was not really a surplus. It was the intent to use EDC funds, which is funds used to purchase land for future sites. We did not spend as much as we had projected, and therefore we did not achieve that surplus. If you look at what actually happened, you can see that the revenues and expenses are significantly higher than what we had initially budgeted for. And those revenues and expenses can be almost entirely contributed to the fact that we were required to create an accrual for future related costs or payroll increases due to contract negotiations, as well as we had to put a significant accrual aside, approximately $26 million, for the purposes of the reversal of Bill 124. There is an agreement in principle with OSSTF and OSSTF-EW. So an accrual was developed and a receivable against that. With those changes, instead of a surplus, we did see a deficit of $2.8 million. Slide, please. So if you look at our comparative summary for the accumulated surplus, the accumulated surplus is the amount of funds set aside that we can use for purposes that we deem necessary or that are actually put aside for specific funds that we cannot negotiate on. We have to use them for specific reasons. So for district compliance, we have decreased by about $9.3 million from $30 million to about $20 million. However, of that $20 million, over $14.6 million of that is related to future-related amortization costs and cannot be used. That leaves us with approximately $6 million, but most of that is earmarked towards issues that we need to keep aside in case of emergency purposes or other related items that are non-negotiable. The rest of it is assigned directly against OCNet at about $5 million. School-generated funds, meaning any funds brought in for school field trips and other fundraising activities, as well as school council, is about $10.2 million. And I should say school council if they, no, sorry, all of school council is in there. You'll see that there's a large negative amount, and that is the asset retirement obligations. That's one of the major issues that Associate Director Giroir mentioned. It's a PSAB adjustment, and it's related to future costs of getting buildings ready for retirement, and that includes issues such as asbestos and other environmental related costs. It is a just a timing issue, and although we had to put in the accrual against that, at some point when we do retire the asset, the ministry will fund that and draw down that accrual. The next one is land acquisitions. As I mentioned before, we did have money set aside for EDC. When we purchase land, it does go into the land acquisitions and the surplus deficit, and we do have land at 1.18 million. And then finally, we have our future employee future benefits, and that is at 7.9, and in 23-24 will be the last year of that requirement, and that will be removed from the surplus. Next slide, please. So then we move on into the compliance-related financials that are remitted to the ministry every year. And we had, although we had projected a surplus on our financial statements, we had always projected a deficit when it comes to compliance reporting to the ministry. Our compliance was budgeted at 9.1, and as Associate Director Giroir mentioned, we did meet that projection of 9.1. It should be noted that there were several, for lack of a better term, lucky breaks that allowed us to maintain that deficit, having that were completely outside of our control, and then just happened to fall into our favor. Had that not happened, we probably would not have met the compliance the ministry would have required. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of our revenues is we did experience an increase pupil foundation allocation, which is related to increase in school average daily enrollment. But most of the additional revenues through the pupil foundation allocation was reserved for future pay increases. As I mentioned before, we had to create a large receivable because there was a recent agreement for the reversal of Bill 24 between the Ministry of Education and OSSTF and OSSTF-EW, and we calculate that to be a value of about $26 million. We have seen an increase in English second language students in registering at the OCDSB, and therefore they qualify for the language funding. Our teacher qualification allocation did go down in 22-23 versus estimates. That is due primarily to more senior teachers retiring from the district and newer teachers replacing them. However, that has also caused our average salary to go down. And so we are still seeing savings from that happening. Although OCNet fell short, if you reviewed the reports that we provided, OCNet fell slightly short of the projected revenues, but they were significantly higher over the 21-22 year. And we expect that post-COVID, they'll get back to normal. As well, we saw a sharp increase in priorities and partnership funding, or PPFs, but that was mainly due to a remedial payment to EDFO teachers for a prior period event. And that was about $5 million. Thank you. So a quick overview of the expenses. We have seen a significant increase in replacement costs post-COVID. We were hopeful that we would go back to pre-COVID costs, but I think we have reached a new normal. And so that was that was about $15 million over budget. School operations and maintenance continues to feel the pressure of inflationary and climate-related cost pressures. Snow removal, for example, was about double the budgeted amount that we had projected. The largest increase in expenses, as I mentioned before, is related to future salary costs and reversal of Bill 124. So I do need to be clear that any of those increases in revenues reflective of those future related costs cannot be used for any other purpose other than those future negotiated increases. And finally, the asset retirement obligation was implemented this year, but based on ministry guidelines, was primarily a restated item in 21-22 with approximately a current cost of about $6 million. So we are aware that there are several pressing issues facing the OCDSB, and we would like to ask them to be considerations for advocacy at the board level. One being transportation. The Ministry of Education has recently announced a considerable funding change to transportation, moving away from a per pupil allocation to a more complex model involving distance from home to school, fuel costs, etc. This really limits the district's ability to provide a dynamic transportation solution for our students. Special education. This program is consistently underfunded and constantly requires regular funding to support the basic required needs of these students. Replacement costs have gone up significantly. For example, prior to COVID, we would experience between $23 and $25 million worth of replacement costs just for occasional teachers. And we now see that cost has risen to approximately $36 million without any real increase in the allotment that the ministry provides school districts to fund that. We also are aware that there are continuing mental health and well-being needs of our students and our staff. And it continues to be a priority for this organization, and additional reports are required to meet those ongoing needs. And finally, we would like to continue to advocate for continued funding for cybersecurity, and it continues to be a priority for this district. There are other areas of concern. Again, as noted, school operation and maintenance continues to experience pressures due to inflation, as well as other areas. And at this point in time, we don't believe that their current funding model will suffice, and we will have to review the allocations to that area. We have experienced in the 23-24 school year a fluctuating student registration And based on the information we've been provided, that we can expect to have a fluctuating student registration for the next few years, making budget-related activities more difficult. We will have to be more dynamic in our ability to meet budgetary requirements. Inflation will continue to increase the pressures in all areas of decision-making. And finally, our lack of reserves leaves us vulnerable to unexpected costs. At this point, if anything happens outside of our budgeted expenses, we would have to find areas of savings in order to meet any unexpected costs. So in summary, the Ministry of Education will continue to expect at a minimum balanced budgets until the district can rebuild their reserves, and rebuilding those financial reserves will need to be a priority during the budget planning exercises for the foreseeable future. The district remitted a balanced budget for the 23-24 school year. However, a reduction in the average daily enrollment, or ADE, will require further review of expenses at revised estimates. And then finally, all budget holders at the district will need to be diligent in their decision-making to ensure spending does not exceed budgets. We will have to be very vigilant with every funding source that we have to make sure that we do not exceed any budgetary line items at this point, as we don't have other funds to supplement that at this point. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And we do have the audited consolidated financial statements in our agenda package. Are there any questions for staff on the report? This being a very large piece of our fiduciary responsibility. Trustee Aziz?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, General Manager, as well. I appreciate that. Sorry, I'm looking at you above a chair. I'm not. There we go. I can see your face. I wanted to ask kindly if you could share that presentation with it. I found it very, with the Board of Trustees. If you could share it, I found it very succinct, and I found the advocacy page also very helpful, as well as the subsequent areas of concern. I think that would be really helpful as we move into budget conversations with the province as well. And I think trustees will find it helpful, especially the advocacy committee. So thank you.
Through your chair, I'm sorry. I just understand you would want to, you just wanted us to share the PowerPoint?
Very simply, yes.
Yeah, of course. Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff? I really appreciate the presentation. That's helpful. I imagine those of you on the audit committee saw it last night, but that doesn't mean all the rest of us did. So it was good to have it here this evening, and we appreciate that. With that, is there further discussion, introduction, or anything else with regard to the motion that has come to us from the audit committee meeting last night orally in terms of approving the audited financial statements? That was moved by Trustee Lee in substitution for Brian Burns, seconded by Trustee Lyra. And if there is no discussion or introduction or wrap up or anything else required, I think we should proceed to the vote on eScribe. And if you can't do eScribe, please vote orally out loud. And the motion is carried with 10 in favor, none opposed. And I would like to extend appreciation through staff to our external auditors for all of the work that was undertaken to prepare, to review these statements, and to staff from the finance department for putting the statements together in the first place. Moving on then to the next item on our agenda. We have, I hope, a report from our OPSPA representatives. I will call on Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Scott. As Chair Scott mentioned in her opening report, Chair Scott and I attended the OPSPA Annual Advocacy Day on Queen's Park, at Queen's Park. There were several priorities that OPSPA advocates for. Number one, Indigenous education. There is a concern that Indigenous languages are at risk of disappearing. And there's the fear that there is a deficit may jeopardize the funding for Indigenous education initiatives. Another priority is the school capital and facilities. School boards have been delicately balancing the upkeep of aging infrastructure while delivering quality programming in our schools. But the current situation has created unsustainable funding deficits due to the current moratorium. So OPSPA is advocating for the freeze on moratorium to be removed. Thirdly, the grants for student needs, GSNs. Students are continuing to recover from the pandemic, and there are concerns that the GSNs are not meeting the demands for our students, specifically with mental health. And lastly, the fourth priority for OPSPA is the education funds. Since the pandemic, there's been a demand for increased demand for special education supports and resources. It's certainly increased over the last few years and is currently underfunded. So it's important that school boards are able to ensure that the students are receiving the appropriate level of care.
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins. Are there any questions with regard to the OPSPA report? And I'm not seeing any hands up, so thank you very much for that. Next item is an OSTA update. If there is an OSTA update, Trustee Lee.
There's nothing new since last week.
So there's no OSTA update right now. You have in your agenda package a copy of the board work plan for this year. We are, as you can see, beginning to be in a position to start ticking some things off, but we still have a lot ahead of us. If there are any questions about the work plan, now is the time to raise them. And seeing none, are there, oh, sorry, Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Through you, I do have a question. And it's going to be a question that I ask every board meeting. Can we have an update on when we can expect some metrics measuring against this work plan from, I don't know if staff want to comment, but can we have an update on the metrics? Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate Vice Chair Milburn's query. We will, in a series of reports, including the one, for instance, around student achievement, bring metrics that we'll be talking about with respect to each item. I do understand moving forward and into next year's work plan, we'll have a more solid overlay of the metrics to each and every key element of our strategic pillar, but we will look to integrate metrics as reports come forward to the Board of Trustees, including the one, for instance, upcoming on student achievement.
Trustee Milburn, anything further?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions? And I'm not seeing any. Matters for information and other new business. And I'm not seeing any new business, which means that we have reached the end of our agenda, and I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.